Sonic X Comic Issue 1. We start out the comic with the text blurb saying that not long ago, Sonic charged into Chaos Control to thwart Eggman's scheme to use the emeralds. How would that do that? Running into a warping light ruined Eggman's plan, apparently. I thought it was... well, I vaguely remember it not being that. And an explosion during a battle hurled the heroes and Eggman and the Emeralds into Station Square on Earth. So it looks like the X comic skips out showing us how the heroes actually got to the boring, realistic human world, while the anime it's inspired by actually did show us in the first episode. That's weird. Since it's a comic, I expect the opposite, if anything, because usually comics are more about the story and are better at writing, and while they're also about not having as much padding from limited space in them, the heroes going to the world the comic takes place in doesn't exactly qualify as padding. So that was weird. Why would they skip out showing us something that's mandatory to understand the context? They just assume that the only people who are buying this comic are the ones that are watching the anime, when it's perfectly reasonable to only want to read the comic, because then they wouldn't have to deal with the anime's voice acting. You know, the 4 kids' voices. We see that in the desert outside of Station Square, Sonic's having yet another race with Sam Speed in his car, because it turns out there was a race before this point. In the anime, specifically, in the first episode. So is the anime canon to the comic then? Because not only is this comic assuming that we watched the anime, since Sonic's first race with him was in the first episode, but it's also assuming that we've already met and become familiar with Chris and his Professor Grandpa, and we see that Sonic's already reunited with Amy and Kareem. I'd like to point out that the only Sonic X that I've ever watched was Sonic F, an amazing abridged parody series of that show that's probably a lot funnier and more enjoyable. Even if it's too self-aware for its own good at times, it makes Knuckles into a complete joke, which he was in the original, but that's really no excuse for never taking him seriously. I don't know anybody who finds the stupid Knuckles jokes funny. I'm pretty sure the one thing everyone in the fanbase agrees on is that they made Knuckles too stupid, and he was a more respectable character before Sonic X. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. We haven't even seen Knuckles yet. The point is, I've just started this comic, and the only reason I'm not completely disoriented and confused is because I watched an abridged parody of the anime it's inspired by. On the bright side, I gotta give props to the comic for not wasting our time telling us stuff we already know by retelling the exact same things we saw in the anime pilot. But a comic book not establishing how the heroes got where they are right off the bat is pretty bad form. After the text blurb tries to have us believe that the race car of a regular mortal human might actually win against Sonic, and I promptly wonder if Sam is actually a wizard or his race car was invented by Chris's not Uncle Chuck, since that's the only way him keeping up with Sonic can remotely make sense without Sonic potentially going slow for him. We see that even Sonic's friends are worried that he's not gonna win. Talk about unself-aware. It should be obvious that Sonic's gonna win the race. Even Cream knows this, and she's supposed to be the most naive one. The whole tension here is completely artificial. Not to mention the fact that, well, of course it's artificial tension, because does it really matter if he loses the race to Sam? It's not like it's gonna kill him. Sonic even looks stressed out and wishes he had a ring. And it's explained that him using a ring would be considered cheating. So, I guess the explanation for why rings are on the boring mortal Earth world is that they came from the Chaos Emeralds' energy fields. Fine. I just really have to wonder what the point is of putting the magical, fantastical Sonic characters on a planet that's just like ours with nothing mystical and wonderful about it. Even they must have known that, because they put the Chaos Emeralds and rings on Earth specifically to make it more Sonic-like. Why not just have it take place in Sonic's world then? What uniqueness does the boring human world have to offer? They did it better in Archie, where the humans had their city, but it was still in the world of Sonic that had magical things happening, sci-fi things happening. So it wasn't like the city was totally boring. And they did it a lot better in Fleetway, where, well, at first it seems like it has a normal Earth planet. Eventually it turns out that the people there have access to a time machine, and the Colonel has access to an interdimensional teleporter so he can go invade Mobius, even though Earth is in the time period of 1998. So while the Earth planet looks just like ours, it's not really as boring and realistic as you'd expect at first glance. So I think if Sonic X took place in a futuristic city, like Future City and Sonic Riders, maybe it would be more forgivable that it's all humans, because it would still be sci-fi fantasy like Sonic's supposed to be. Instead, it's just boring because it's all modern technology and boring, realistic people. Humans are not. Surprise, surprise, Sonic does actually win the race. Even though it would have been a brilliant subversion to have Sonic actually lose and spend a long time with a bruised ego for a change. And then he works out to try to get fast enough to beat him next time. And since the car is fast enough to be just behind him in the race, it winning while it's at it wouldn't be out of the question if they're that close. I guess it would have been funny if Sonic had tripped, and that's what cost him the race. But no, Sonic's the creator's pet mascot darling. Of course he has to win. So far I'm not impressed by this comic. It started out with a totally uninteresting and predictable story that's nothing but pointless padding, even if it does show the heroes in their downtime, with no explanation of how the heroes got where they are. Can Eggman attack now? And you know I'm bored when I'm dying for Eggman to show up. The generic cliched one-dimensional take over the world for no reason main villain of the series who shows up way too often. Also, the whole concept of Sam being proud of his reputation as the fastest human is ridiculous. Because he's not fast, his car is. That's like saying you're the fastest guy on the sidewalk because you're driving your van past the jogger. It'd make more sense if his pride was around his car being the fastest, and at that point, okay, just get a faster engine. Anyone could drive that car that fast. Even then, if a normal human was driving a car that could move at the speed of sound, the G-forces would kill him, wouldn't it? Even if it didn't, and he's like a super trained air pilot person, his car would take forever to brake properly. And I say properly because if it stopped on a dime, whiplash would be an understatement. I'm having a lot of fun nitpicking at Sonic comic to death again. But other than that, there's nothing impressive about the story so far. And both Archie and Fleetway beat the shit out of this. Why would Amy keep her compliment to Sonic to herself instead of saying it out loud? That's out of character, and it really wouldn't have been hard to not make this mistake and have it in a proper text bubble. The heroes decide to go back to Chris's mansion for dinner, and Sam whines about how he wants to be faster than a supersonic hedgehog by driving a car he's not always in. Why would he even care? He's a mortal human up against a magical creature. Of course Sonic has the advantage. He should just accept that and still be just as proud of himself because he manages to be that fast despite being immortal. He's still the fastest human in his car, but even then, that's just his car, not him. If he could actually run at Sonic's speed, he'd make a better rival in the speed department. Then it's established that Eggman's base is on the island off Station Square's Emerald Coast, and to cast a shadow over the forest that he hasn't cut down for some weird reason. Okay, already Eggman's less interesting because he's not obsessively hating nature and wanting it destroyed. But Eggman doesn't say that he's keeping the forest around specifically to hide his base better. He could hide his base by having it be built underground, or going up into space. As much as I used to complain about how little sense it made that Robotnik hated nature for no reason, at least Robotnik's hatred of nature gave him more of a personality. He had a stronger identity than just mad scientist who wants to take over the world like Dr. Wily, because he was also about being a strawman industrialist to contrast Sonic, which he clearly was since Sonic 1. so it's not just ATM, it's the games too. But here, Eggman built his base in a forest on an island where nobody would be anyways, and he still hasn't cut that forest down. The base towers over the trees, so really, there goes the he's hiding it with the trees argument, which could have been interesting if the base didn't tower over the trees. Why doesn't the president of Station Square immediately fire a nuke at his island? It's a whole island where presumably nobody lives on it except Eggman and his robots. The only logical explanation is that the island is so close to Station Square that if it did get nuked, the nuclear radiation would spread to populated areas, and even if he just settled with bombing it without nuclear energy, maybe the shockwave of the bomb and loud noise and perhaps even fire and stuff would spread to Station Square. Still though, if Eggman has an established base somewhere, the president's first idea should be to send the military to it. And not just him, but every country should be doing that to Eggman. But no! Let's just leave it to Sonic the irresponsible teenager who would never have the guts to assassinate him, and isn't allowed by the writers to permanently imprison him. That's believable writing. It's the AOSCH problem all over again. Well, one of the minor problems of that show anyways. Already the premise of the continuity is severely put into question, because we need his base to be standing for him to make robots and stuff for the episodes. But that base shouldn't still be standing. And he should be way too busy fighting off militaries to have the time to fight Sonic, because he's not ruling the whole world. Did he get warped to Earth keeping his vast army of robots? I doubt it. I think he would have to build a new robot from scratch. With what materials? Apparently there's a vast supply of metals on this island he happened to build his base on. Who knew? And maybe he was unknown to the world for long enough that he could build stuff like a robot army. And a base that's made of indestructible metal with a tight security system inside and out. And he was too busy occupying himself with building all that the first chance he got to introduce himself to Earth and get his plans nipped in the bud. After all, he didn't introduce himself to Earth in the first episode. Alright then. I just have to assume this because the comic started out in medias res. Oh, surprise, surprise. Eggman's personal scene is going to waste my time with him whining like a baby. I'm already extremely sick of this shit from the games, like Sonic Unleashed for example. Why does he call Earth the backwards planet when Sam has a car that can almost outrun Sonic? I mean, wouldn't he know about that by now? I guess the only futuristic technology on the planet comes from Chris's uncle. No, I don't think he did make Sam's car. I think there's a whole speed team that somehow makes his car. Eggman then whines that no one will give him the components he needs to build his world-conquering robots. Okay, I guess he used up all of the robot materials on building his base. And since he's Eggman, he went overboard making the base too tall, and didn't have materials left over to make robots. It does make sense that people wouldn't give him the components he needs, since he's an evil wannabe dictator and no one would want him to win because then he'd be ruling over them. And I guess at this point in time, he doesn't have the kind of robots or dangerous technology that could threaten people into giving him those components or dig up the components himself, or brainwash people. I've had to say I guess a lot lately. Wait, is he talking about materials or components? Which are electrical components fashioned out of materials already. Build it yourself, moron! Why are you expecting people to just hand you robot components already made to your own advanced robots? I hope that was just a bad line and not actually the intent. And I'm guessing, yep, even though he's whining about not having world-conquering robots, he's got Doko and Boko with him. Or Deco and Boko? Whatever the worthless discount scratching grounder are called. I never liked their name. It's so confusing. I actually warmed up to Scratch and Grounder after a while. I mean, they have charm. And a lot of that is because of their distinct, memorable designs. These guys are just ugly, monochrome robots that both have the same personality. Orbot and Cubot are better because they contrast each other. And since I'm not the biggest fan of Pontac and Graf, in fact, I take Penders over them, It's sad to see that even they came up with better discount scratching routers than these guys did. I don't understand why they can't just use them. What is it, a copyright issue? They appeared in 2 different continuities. Eggman complains about being expected to pay for the robot parts, saying with entitlement that they should just give them to him in exchange for not being crushed by his next robot. But if they give them to him, that'll guarantee that he'll make that robot. Doesn't he get it? So far, he doesn't have anything to threaten them with, aside from these guys. Which leads me to my original point before I started complaining about them. If Eggman had the time to waste making these guys after he came to Earth, why didn't he just outfit them with weapons and use them as world-conquering robots? Maybe they existed before he came to Earth. But still, why not give them weapons to start with? Put laser shooters in them. Give them jetpacks, extendable limbs, something! Scratch and Grounder had extendable limbs. And Grounder could even fly. But I have a feeling that these guys aren't going to have special abilities. I do like that Eggman's mad about having to pay people though. That's in character for him. However, it's really stupid that he calls the people of this planet humans, as if to imply that he is not a human, when he clearly is. And worst of all, what's probably the stupidest part of this whole issue, he talks as if the exchange of money for goods and services is something only Earth has. Are you fucking kidding me? You expect me to believe that? Really? The only way he could have not heard of money before is if he lived an extremely sheltered life. At that point, there's no way he would have gotten educated enough to become an engineer. Even in ancient times, people had money. And the only way he considered these guys humans and not himself, when he clearly looks just as human as they do, is if he used to be a Mobian and then he got changed to a human by an experiment gone wrong. Maybe that experiment could have been what turned him evil, but I doubt the comic would bother to explain that and complete the fundamental plot hole regarding Eggman that makes him such an unbelievable character most of the time. I'm sure he'll just be evil for no reason. This is just as stupid as when Sonic Live did it. Why is Eggman talking as if he's not a human, and they are, and they're all aliens to him? Are humans on Mobius called a different thing? No, because it's established later that his grandfather came from Earth. At least Robotnik looked significantly less human because he was way fatter and had metallic limbs, eyes, and ears. I was under the impression that Sonic X was going with the games canon and Eggman came from Earth because J.R. Robotnik is his grandfather in the games, and they're going to introduce Shadow at some point to shill the game. So I guess this was written before the whole Gerald thing came to light, and he just doesn't know about his own inventor grandpa's origin planet yet. Even though he looked up to him his whole life, and he's why he became an inventor. But yeah, stupidest panel ever. And we see him watching people through camera footage. So he has flying invisible cameras all over the place beyond his base, and yet he still doesn't have the materials to make world-threatening robots. You idiot! You could have not made those cameras yet, and used the materials to make robots. You could have outfitted those cameras with lasers. But I suppose this is being in character for Eggman, because he's a ditzy cloud cookie lander who doesn't like to think ahead, and he's all style and no substance. He's not about being efficient. I like that idea, but it's not pointed out that he's wasting a lot of his robot materials right off the bat. It just seems like an unintentional glaring plot hole. Eggman plans to steal some money for himself while talking as if the idea of that and money itself is completely foreign to him. No society would function without money. Does Mobius still work in a trade economy system? That kind of thing stopped working extremely early on in history for good reason. Eventually it becomes too complicated to determine what to trade for what. That's why money was invented. Why is Eggman calling this planet backwards when, if he came from a planet with no paper bills, he's obviously come from a planet more backwards than Earth? And it's not like Mobius just uses credit cards either, because he says the word money as if it's a foreign word to him. People wouldn't forget what money is. I get that they're trying to emphasize that he's an alien, which is kind of cool in theory, but I can't buy that any world with a functioning society of people would work without money. What, does this planet work on feudalism? That's where people were slaves to the local lords. farming the farmland for them. And again, that pre-capitalism state of economy is really backwards. This is an interesting idea, but it makes no sense. This is somehow even worse than Archie saying that now money has no value, because at least in Archie, the world was mostly brainwashed robot slaves at that point, so they wouldn't be using money. And Robotnik could just threaten people as the robot backed up dictator he was, and so he didn't need money either. It's not like Eggman is in that same dictatorship position back on Mobius in this continuity. It's not like he comes from a long line of dictators like that and everyone on Mobius is a brainwashed robot slave. Of course not, that'd be an idea from another superior continuity and be too dark. There's no explanation for why he's unfamiliar with money. It just happens. He tells his two robots to take money out of ATMs for him. I hope he means smash the ATMs apart, because otherwise, how would they get it out of there without credit cards of their own? We then see the robots outside of a national bank, with the cop just standing there outside doing nothing around an ATM. What a waste of a cop's time. Does this particular ATM get people mugged a lot? I guess the reason no one's freaking out over these robots is that the only one who's actually looking at them is one little kid, but she clearly points them out to her mother. Or he, whatever. If that mother doesn't immediately look over at them, that's the most oblivious mother in the world, and I refuse to believe the sight of these robots wouldn't cause a panic the minute everyone saw them. They press buttons on the ATM in a futile attempt to get money out of them, being so naive that it's actually pretty fascinating. But again, them not being familiar with money is stupid for the same reason as Eggman. They only get the cops' attention when one of them suggests breaking the ATM open. And even then, the cop isn't reacting properly to the fact that he's clearly seeing robots. What the fuck? He just expects them to come down to the station and be intimidated by his stick, which they are, instead of immediately trying to fight him, because they're robots who are only programmed to obey Eggman. Don't tell me it's going to be another scratch and grounder situation where they kowtow to any authority figures, even if they are Eggman. Well, this comic seems to suck so far. I mean, it's been 24 minutes, and I'm still pointing out all the flaws. But on the bright side, it's pretty cathartic for me to tear badly written stories apart, and it's really fun for me to nitpick them to death. I feel like I've been writing forever, and I've barely started. We see a text box over Chris's mansion, and it says that his parents are rarely home because their jobs take them all over the world. If I correctly remember this, his father's the CEO, and it's his mother that's an actress. I think all over the world would be an exaggeration, wouldn't it? Why wouldn't they just stay in America? What about those two jobs would make them travel to different countries all the time where Hollywood isn't? Well, I'm not a CEO myself, I have watched Arrested Development, and Michael doesn't constantly go all over the world in that show. That was a silly line. After we see that Chris is naturally needy for his absentee parents since he hugs his confused mother because she came home, we suddenly see that Eggman's robots are back with Eggman, with no attempt at a proper transition from last time. I expected that the next time we'd see them, they'd be in jail, or at least attacking the cop. Instead of those panels being wasted, we should have just seen them get away from the cop, who they should have been hard programmed to just beat up so they can break the ATM. This is such an unrealistic resolution to the conflict. Robots wouldn't act like that. At least Eggman not trashing them for their failure is justified because he doesn't have the materials to make new robots right now. But there's still no excuse for him not reprogramming them to not make that mistake again. They're probably gonna be just as flimsy as Scratch and Grounder were, where realistically they should have been given up on by the first ridiculous failure. At least Scratch and Grounder's losses are generally justified because they're up against Sonic. These guys lost to a mere mortal. Then I'm expected to believe that Eggman has a flying visible camera inside of the money vault of a bank, when he's just learned about what banks are now. So the cameras have to be flying on their own without him telling them where to go. How did they not bump into people passing by and cause mass hysteria? That'd be funny, actually. It'd be a nice plot where we saw a realistic consequence of the flying visible cameras actually being used for a different purpose for a change. But anyways, the only way this camera footage of a bank vault could have been taken is if the flying invisible camera happened to fly into the vault just when its door was opened. Maybe it has its own AI to control itself. Or maybe Eggman remotely took control of the camera off screen and flew it into the vault himself. So that makes a lot more sense. After he expects me to believe he doesn't have banks on Mobius, I'm at least amused that Eggman's talking as if the idea of a bank robbery is something only he's come up with. It's really naive, and it's interesting to see Eggman acting new to the world. Then when one of his robots asks why they don't rob the bank tonight and not tomorrow, Eggman says that they know tonight is the night when he waxes his mustaches. Because apparently that's the thing people do with their mustaches. I thought you only wax floors. It isn't character for Eggman to be so arrogant and flighty that he picks personal vanity over carrying out an evil plan as soon as possible. So far, I'm finding him more entertaining than the gaze Eggman is, which is good because he needs to be entertaining to make up for his pathetic position in this continuity, where he's just a wannabe dictator instead of a genuine threat that's really inconveniencing people. Like, would actually make sense with the kind of inventions he can make. Eggman's, of course, decided to target the bank where Chris's family keeps their money, so that Sonic can go stop him because he'll be in the vicinity. This at least makes sense because maybe his flying cameras are in such a limited supply that they only film Station Square, and he only sends them to Station Square. It's the closest city to his base after all. So he chooses that bank for convenience's sake, and to spite Chris's family. But logically, he should at least try to rob a different bank. Even if, well, the news footage would still show Deco and Boko on it and alert Sonic to stop them in seconds, regardless of which bank they robbed. Then he uses a lottery to randomly determine which of his robots will make the withdrawal, because he has so many robots that he can't decide. Wait a minute! He was just talking about not having robot components. I thought he didn't have any robots other than these guys. But apparently he has enough of them that he can't decide which one to send. So that's a plot that they created and then dropped in the span of one story. In a story where nothing important has even happened yet because there's so much padding. All the more proof that Archie and Fleetway are better. Also, how does this slot machine deciding work? It'd take forever for him to line up 3 of the same robot. I could understand if each slot reel represented one robot, and he always sent out 3 of them. Or maybe the slot reels are programmed to always match each other up. So they're still randomizing the robot selected, but only the first one is randomized. The other 2 reels match it up so that Eggman won't be there all day. By the way, I don't find this tense and threatening at all because I'm sure it's a foregone conclusion that Eggman's plan here will fail. Not only because Sonic can move at the speed of sound, but also because this is the same bank where Chris's family keeps their money. And if they lost all their money, they'd lose the one thing that makes Chris stand out as remotely interesting. His rich parents that are always too busy for him. I always liked that about Chris. He's not as boring, generic, normal kid as he could be because they cared enough to add that one extra detail. And it really speaks to what a good-natured kid he is from the start, that having neglectful parents did make him angry and bitter and rebellious. Well, that's how I imagine Scourge became evil. Different people can handle their problems to varying degrees, and Chris is just more patient than Ultimate Sonic is. Chris's parents decide to go bring the heroes and him to their villa at the beach because just staying at home isn't good enough for them for some reason. Why don't they just live at the villa? Why do they need 2 homes to pay 2 taxes on? And Sonic naturally finds the bank and villa boring. They're gonna stop at the bank on their way to the villa, so he wants to do something else. Okay, so Chris and his family doing a boring, normal person thing will be helpful to the plot because they'll witness the bank robbery, and that's how Sonic will find out about it. Good, except Sonic should be able to find out about it on the news anyways. Although maybe the robots would make a break for it long before he'd get to find out what they did if he didn't get an early warning system. But it all falls apart when Chris's father says that lines like this are why he always uses ATMs. So there's officially no logical reason for why they went inside the bank. They're only here to warn Sonic about the robbery that's going to happen. Also, I don't see the point of all of them at once going into the bank to wait in a boring line. Wouldn't most of them want to stay in the car? Play on their cell phones? There's a distracting fourth wall breaking moment, or however you classify this, because someone says they won't give a comic book writer a loan because it's not a real job. This so-called joke just irritated me, completely took me out of it. Though I was kind of detached to begin with thanks to the no money thing. But seriously, why would the writer of this comic even want to insult himself in the comic like that? Why would he think that's funny? Amy characteristically wishes that Sonic was here, and Tails gives further justification to why he's not. Sonic hates water, so he wouldn't go to the beach. Even though he did talk underground just fine, but it's not like he was in the water. I guess the only reason he ever went there in the first place to find out he hated it was because a civilian needed help there, or Eggman was terrorizing the beach. Suddenly, someone yells out and then opens the door of the bank to warn everyone to run for cover, and then the glass gets smashed apart, and it turns out he was warning everyone about Eggman showing up to rob the bank himself with his mouse robot. Huh, he's doing the dirty work himself instead of just making incompetent robots do it. I respect that, he's being proactive. His dumb robots have less opportunities to fail and make me wonder why they weren't scrapped. And because he's evil, he wants to do evil things himself and not make his sidekicks hog all the action. This makes more sense than OSTH. And all the other Sonic cartoons for that matter. Then we see that Sonic's completely unaware of Eggman's attack, and instead took the time to visit Angel Island, which floats over the Sapphire Sea. So it's Earth, but not our Earth because it has a made-up sea. Fine. Shouldn't Angel Island just be on Mobius though? What, did it teleport over to Earth because it missed Knuckles? I didn't see Sonic X's Adventure adaptation, and it looks like this comic doesn't care enough to fill me in. I thought the comic would either be its own thing, or worst case scenario, just have the episodes of the show in comic form. It looks like it's got the anime canon to it, which means it's a Parasite series. It requires you to be familiar with a completely different medium, or you'll be a little lost when reading it. Archie never did that. I hope there's going to be a proper explanation for how Sonic got all the way up to Angel Island. It's a floating island. You can't exactly run up to it whenever you want. That's what makes it great. That's the whole reason it's floating. To make it harder for thieves to get there. I guess I'm supposed to believe that Sonic himself flew the tornado biplane to get here. Fine, he did that in other continuities too. But having one panel showing him do that wouldn't be hard. Knuckles asks why Sonic is so glad to see him. So either he's insecure, which is refreshing, or he thinks Sonic really dislikes him and wonders why he'd want to be with him. You'd think he'd have learned that's not true by now, since it can't be true in this continuity or Sonic wouldn't even come here. He tells Knuckles that he wants to go for a run with him. I guess by that he means that he'll intentionally slow himself down and run at his speed so he wouldn't immediately leave him in the dust, defeating the purpose of going for a run with him. He just likes running so much as an activity that he'll still enjoy it when he's intentionally running slower. Knuckles is his serious, stoic self from SA2, speaking in formal language like must and cannot, while refusing to stop guarding the Master Emerald for even a few minutes. I hope this means that in the comic, they won't overplay the whole Knuckles the gullible idiot joke like they do in the show. Comic writers tend to be better at taking the material seriously from what I've seen. Even Amy hasn't been played for unfunny comedy yet. She just admires Sonic. And in her thoughts. I saw her trying to hug him or something, and he just let her instead of freaking out like a dick. So this seems to be an improvement so far, character-wise. Still, though, I have to wonder why Sonic would bother at this point. Shouldn't he have been friends with Knuckles for long enough that he should know how hard it is to get him away from the Emerald? He's just going up to him so casually to ask him for a race, like he's gotten one a million times before. But he should know that Knuckles won't agree to it, so why does he bother? Maybe this particular Sonic gets lonely really easily. Anyways, after Eggman's machine creates some genuine tension by threatening Chris's parents and attacking Tanaka, it tries to break into the vault, when it could have easily killed Chris's family in that time, but that would have been too dark and wasted characters. So meta logic, even though realistically Eggman wouldn't restrain himself from doing something evil. I was impressed when I saw that Amy said it was up to her because Sonic wasn't there. She raises her hammer and smacks the robot as it's about to launch missiles. It would have been awesome if she could launch missiles from her hammer. But I got my hopes up for nothing. That would have been unique, so we can't have that. We see Eggman covered in soot from his robot's missiles hitting him instead of the vault door, which logically made me assume that this was the end of the fight and that the comic had wasted so much space on padding that it didn't have the time to give Amy a properly sized fight scene. So naturally I was surprised that after Amy dodges an attack thanks to Tails, Eggman is magically free of the missile burns to the next panel. While I like that he's being entertaining by finding it hard to choose between money and revenge, there's no way he'd survive slapstick of that degree. We could have had Eggman not get hit by the missile. We could have had his Eggmobile be high enough up to avoid it, as it logically should have been. We can still have Eggman in the scenes being entertaining, but I just hope it won't constantly add stupid slapstick that no human should be able to survive. He should need to go to the hospital at best after that, but apparently he's just fine and that was just there for the sake of forcing a joke. For some reason, Amy wasn't taking advantage of the opportunity to keep attacking the robot with her hammer while Eggman was wasting time talking and just stood there the whole time doing nothing. Then we see that Sonic's back in Station Square, running along the road, and he hears someone saying that there's a bank robbery in progress. Okay, so Chris's family going to the bank with Sonic's friends wasn't there so that they could warn Sonic about the robbery. Instead, it was only there for the sake of having Amy have a reason to be at the bank already for the sake of starting out the fight scene. Otherwise, they're just kidnapping fodder. The Princess Peach. And Amy and Tails had no reason to go into the bank with them just to wait in line. But then again, they would have rushed into the bank anyways the minute Eggman burst into it in front of them. Because Knuckles didn't leave his island, Sonic going to him was just entirely pointless and wasted comic space. Compare this story to Archie, where at least in the early days where the pacing was faster, we didn't have entire scenes completely wasted most of the time. Here, most of the story was padding until we got to the climax. Sonic's at least entertaining here because when he hears about Eggman robbing a bank, all he does is complain that something exciting happened without him there, and he doesn't want to miss the fun. He's not concerned for people's well-being and hoping the people in the bank aren't hurt. He's not angry and serious about Eggman. All he cares about is having fun being a daredevil. This is Sonic at his best. So at the very least, Sonic and Eggman seem to be written surprisingly well by the franchise's standards. Of course, Amy loses her mallet, and Sonic has to save her, and Tails at that. I guess we didn't really miss anything exciting with her, because all she ever does is hit stuff with her hammer. How interesting. This is why the Fleetway Amy is the best one. It's much more interesting to have her with the bow because not only does she fire arrows at the robots directly, but sometimes she fires arrows and stuff to reflect them back at the robots, or she fires them at inanimate objects like a computer or a button. There's lots more stuff she can do compared to just whacking a hammer, which anyone can do. At least Fleetway Amy has an impressive, unique talent because she's an expert archer. She has to worry about aiming the thing, and we get impressed with her aim. After Sonic wastes time running around the robot in a circle just to taunt it, I'm really impressed because they actually had him get hit by one of its arms. That's good. So the comic already shows a better understanding of tension than AOSCH does on a regular basis. His first fight in the comic, and he starts out humiliating himself. Tails tries to get some rings out of a bag he was carrying around and gets hit, and the rings scatter around him thanks to the robot. So I love that, one, they care enough to give him a bag to put the rings in instead of stupid hammer space, and two, they're using the rings' invincibility scattering thing from the games in an actual story. They scatter, but they still stay there to be picked up again. And that is something I haven't seen in a story in a very long time. After some brief tension because Chris is scared and Amy wishes she had her mallet, Sonic deflates all of it by finding a ring and homie attacking the robot a whole bunch of times. Am I seriously expected to believe that he needs to have rings to homie attack? Okay, different continuity, but that's the most arbitrary change I've ever seen. Why make Sonic start out as weaker just for the sake of making the rings become a Deus Ex Machina? Though at least the rings aren't outright granting wishes. But still, all this does is make him less impressive because he's only being competent because of rings. That he's lucky he even has because he's stuck on Earth. What's he gonna do without them? Eggman's smart enough to go collect some rings while Sonic's distracted. Oh good, there's actually a rat inside of that rat-shaped robot. Please let this be the case with every animal-shaped robot from now on. That was the most threatening Badnik I've ever seen in a Sonic continuity. It's impressive that we got to see Sonic fight a Badnik and not destroy in one hit. Or just a few hits. Sure, it was still just a few panels, but he had to do a lot of consecutive homing attacks on it all over the place at super speed, and it was after it attacked him and was really threatening to people. I hope every Badnik is portrayed this way from now on. I'd rather them be genuine threats than just cannon fodder wasting comic space. It's weird that Eggman is talking as if he's leaving an establishment with really rude people and trying to have funny dialogue when he just lost. So shouldn't he just be angry and complaining childishly? Eggman wouldn't have the composure to talk like this after he lost. Then Sam is made fun of because he showed up too late to do anything, and he wishes he could be the only hero of Station Square once again. This so-called joke has already gotten old. I don't care about this character. He looks like an arrogant jerk. Then a text blurb over the mansion says that already it's been a week and Chris's school vacation is over. Wait, what? Oh, okay, it's not summer vacation. It's just school vacation. But still, why bother telling us that he has the week off if that week is going to end in the same issue where it was introduced? That was pointless. We're told that a few days later, the president tells Sonic he has an important mission for him, and Sonic salutes him, saying earnestly that he can count on him. Wait, is he a casual, informal, fun-loving guy or not? Make up your mind. Flynn had a more character when he greeted the Bat Thief leader and Archie and he was all casual about it. At least I can compliment the tension of the fact that the issue ends with Eggman getting some rings. But why are the robots mentioning a sunken ship? What sunken ship? Is that from the anime too? I'm not gonna watch that first because I really don't want to. And I guess it'd be refreshing to see me with even more of an outsider's perspective on a continuity of Sonic. This story was by Joe Edkin. Okay, so the majority of this issue was pointless padding to me. The only part where I had a scene that was genuinely good was when Eggman attacked with a rat Badnik. Which was impressively threatening for a Badnik because it shot missiles in a bank and attacked people with extendable arms like an evil version of Bunny. This handles Badniks much better than Fleetway does. There was also some amusing characterization of Eggman and Sonic. Eggman's actually entertaining me. And Sonic only really cares about having fun, and not whether Eggman's threatening innocent people, which makes him a daredevil to the point of being an anti-hero. It's really charming. It's like if Scourge became a hero. However, the biggest problem with this story, aside from the stupidity that I'm expected to believe Eggman's never heard of money before, but that was just padding. And that's the problem with the story. Padding. It's all pointless filler I don't care about until we get to the one fight scene at the end, where Sonic gets a ring and apparently he needs that to homing attack a robot to death, killing it anticlimactically in 2 panels. At least he got attacked by it first. But rings being treated like the key to all of Sonic's power just makes them feel like Deus Ex Machinas. Where did Tails get those rings to begin with? They weren't earned. Sonic shouldn't have needed the ring to accomplish this. The only good part of the story was the fight scene, and since it was so pathetically short, it just makes it obvious how much of the story before it should have been cut out. We didn't need to see Sam racing Sonic when Sonic won anyways, and it was a foregone conclusion that he would, and it didn't matter afterwards. We didn't need to see all of Eggman's blathering about wanting to get money, and then somehow the robots run away from a cop instead of beating him in a fight ganging up on him and succeeding in their mission. We didn't need to see Sonic waste time talking to Knuckles for no good reason. How lonely is he? And Chris's family sure is lucky Amy decided to waste time waiting in line at a bank with them instead of staying in the car. What if she wasn't there to buy time for Sonic? This is not an episode structure that works, where the heroes waste time screwing around until the one fight scene at the end. Even the old Sonic cartoons at least got plot structure right, because Eggman had one major plot the whole episode, and he had a bunch of scenes where his lackeys were doing stuff, not just one scene where he loses immediately. There's build-up to the bank scene in the sense that Eggman learns about money, but you should have already known about it. We could have cut all that out. ATM had an episode where it was all about the heroes destroying electricity generators. That's a better plot structure than this, because it was more focused. Most of it was about getting stuff done that at least pretended to matter. It was a lot more about action scenes. Even Sonic Underground had better pacing and episode structure than this. The race scene wasn't absolutely horrible, but it was patronizing and pointless. The other padding scenes weren't horrendous, but they clearly added nothing by existing, and they mostly added lack of logic. If you want to have padding, have scenes where the characters are interacting with each other, their personalities bouncing off each other. Like when Sonic, Sonia, and Manic are talking to each other. Have Sonic have brotherly moments with Tails. All this story is telling me is that this comic might be better off if it got straight to the point. This issue would be a lot better if instead of all that beginning padding and that villain scene build-up, we just had a story where Eggman attacked the bank and Sonic and Amy fought him, but give that story the amount of comic space that the entire issue took up. It'd be a much better action scene because there'd be more tension, actual variety in what's going on, not just Sonic homie attacking it. He ran around it, and if this was Archie or AOSCH, he would have created fire or a tornado by doing that. And I don't care that that's not what he does in the games. It's still more variety in what he's doing. And he made a tornado with Sonic Heroes. The fight scene here makes me think of how the stories in Fleetway are really short and basic. They almost never give one story the entire issue to itself, and instead have multiple stories per issue that aren't related to each other at all. And in Fleetway, I can guarantee you that they wouldn't have the pacing and padding be this bad. They probably would have just started at the bank scene. This just goes to show you that while Fleetway would be better off giving its stories room to breathe, fast pacing is better than this where they just build the issue with padding when the whole story can be summarized in just one short sentence clause. Eggman goes to rob a bank with a Badnik, and Sonic stops him.